Well, hello everyone. Let's follow up on this whole Greg Bahnsen thing with the epistemological argument, which is what a lot of them were saying in the comments. In fact, one of them was just particularly bad about it. No, epistemological. Wouldn't say anything, wouldn't elaborate. Well, I'm going to do you guys a favor. I'm going to show you the argument that you refuse to tell people from one of your own. This is actually a pretty detailed write-up on the epistemological argument. Based on Greg Bahnsen and all of the other presuppositionalists. Yeah, this is going to be it. And it's going to be long because we're going to do a lot of skipping. Really, this thing is the size of a novella. You submitted this as a short story, they tell you to edit it down. So, it's about the epistemological argument for God. And we've got the usual introduction that you generally have from basically people who are trying to show off. This thing's just dripping with narcissism all the way through, as are pretty much all of the presuppositionalists. He talks about himself a lot. So much about, and including the statement of conversion, well, I used to be an agnostic, and then etc., etc., etc. Okay, so in the middle of what I'm skipping, I'm just going to stop it here, though, to just let you know what I'm talking about. He's going to make a lot of this based on Romans chapter 1. And so I thought I'd read out to you the relevant part of that. And this is verses 18 through 20. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. And that's what we keep being shoved in the face with. No, you really know. Atheists aren't really atheists. We're really theists. We're really God believers. We're really Christians because we know, because God has infused us with all of the knowledge in Romans 1. And you know it's true because God wrote the Bible. And you know that God wrote the Bible because the Bible says so. I love that one. Alright, yeah, skipping a lot of this. I do want to catch a couple of other little things in the middle of what I'm skipping. He's giving at this actually as Revelational Epistemology and is associated with the apologetic school of presuppositionalism, which is what we've been talking about. A genuine argument for the presuppositionalist claim that the proof of God exists is that without God you can't prove anything. This popular phrase always seemed to be an empty assertion, but now Bahnsen provides a cogent argument for the claim. So yeah, he's using Greg Bahnsen. This is the guy. This is the guy you wanted me to do a 3-hour video on. I'm not going to do a 3-hour video. Especially when it's all about him teaching people to argue against atheists by calling them fools and pointing to the Bible and say, see, you really do believe you're not really an atheist. Alright, skipping down a little bit more. It will be an argument that God's existence is already plain to us, as Romans 1 declares. The argument will show that we know this because revelation from God is the necessary precondition of us knowing anything at all. If we did not know God exists, we would not be able to evaluate the evidence for or against the existence of God normally presented by natural theology. So this isn't just about believing in God, this is about anything at all. You can't know that 2 + 2 = 4 unless God exists. That's what he's saying. And just one more part of this. He is actually supporting the law of non-contradiction, which a lot of theists want to deny, but we know the law of non-contradiction holds because whether we attempt to affirm or deny it, our argument must assume it holds, or we couldn't even argue the point. The law on non-contradiction is transcendentally certain, since it is an undeniable precondition of affirming or denying anything else. It's way overstating the case. I mean, we know there are no real first principles. There's just where you're going to start with, and non-contradiction is a good place to do that. For the reason he says, because how would you be able to reason through anything? But as far as something of absolute truth, you can go back further than that to the law of identity, and even further, and then you get into Bertrand Russell, you get into Alfred Tarski, you get into Raymond Smullyan, the people who just showed that nothing, not even mathematics, not even pure mathematics, can reduce down to first principles. I guess I should have put Gödel in there, because Gödel started all that off with the incompleteness theorem. Yeah, Kurt Gödel was like the main guy behind that, so can't believe I skipped him. All right, speaking of skipping, lot of skipping. Okay, getting to the argument. The Bible presents the form of the argument as follows. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And remember, atheists are all fools. And the fool says in his heart, there is no God. So if you're an atheist, you despise wisdom and instruction, and therefore you cannot have the fear of the Lord, which is the beginning of knowledge. Romans 1 tells us when we choose not to retain the knowledge of God he gives us over to futile thinking, and we become vain in our reasoning. Yeah, that's going to be a lot of projection. So the claim is an epistemological one, not one of metaphysical explanation. It says if we don't begin with God as the source of our knowledge, we will end up in absurdity, futility in our thinking. This is what I found historically with my agnosticism. When I tried to prove God exists on the basis of reasoning that assumed he might not, I could not prove it. But I could not disprove it either. My thinking was futile. In fact, I found I could not establish any knowledge claim at all when I really examined things. Well, maybe you got it the wrong way around. Maybe what you should actually have done was follow the null hypothesis. And then you say, okay, we're not going to try to, say, oh, well, I couldn't disprove God, therefore. No, it doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. If you can't prove it, then it's rejected. Doesn't matter if you can disprove it. No one is under any obligation to disprove something that no one ever bothered to prove. You didn't prove it, then what would it even mean to disprove it? There's nothing to disprove. There's literally nothing to disprove. But the biblical form of the argument does not begin with any supposed metaphysical fact about reality. It begins before the consideration of facts, with the structure of knowledge and rationality itself. It says if you fail to start with God as your epistemological foundation, you will never arrive at any fact at all, because you will end up in the futility of your thinking. It is saying that God is the necessary presupposition of affirming or denying anything to be a fact. And then he goes into, since the argument is clearly epistemological, we first need to explore how we know the things we know, and then he goes really down the rabbit hole. But how do I know what I am aware of is actually a fact? Sure, it seems to me that I am seeing my hands on the keyboard, that I am experiencing that, but those are just thoughts in my mind. The actual keyboard is not in my mind. Are those really hands I am using, or does it just seem that way too? And how do I know what I take to be my thoughts on all this are really my thoughts at all? If I am aware of my thoughts, are they not also in some sense separate from my awareness of them? What says my awareness of my own thoughts coincides to what is really being thought? Okay, he's trying to be clever here and failing. This is the old, how do you know you're not in the Matrix thing? This is solipsism. Oh, well, you could be a brain in a jar for all you know, and all this is being fed to you as a simulation. And as we'll see, that ends up being completely self-defeating for him. How do I know my mind exists? Then how do I know your mind exists? How do I know your mind is like my mind? Blah, blah, blah. Part of what started to convince me to reconsider my agnosticism was my discovery that the Bible actually claims if we do not start with God, we end up in futile thinking. If you do not think what I just described as futile thinking, your thinking might just be futile. No, because what you described is pure solipsism. The above issues of epistemology are central to the history of philosophy. The traditional arguments for God's existence fall into the same category. They are all based on futile thinking that does not start with God. They have to be because they are trying to approach the question neutrally and see if they can prove that God exists. Basically, he admits that if you start with a neutral examination, you can't prove that God exists. You can only do it if you first assume that God exists. You see what he's doing? And he says, we cannot establish even one external or internal fact is an actual fact, because we cannot get outside ourselves. We cannot verify anything we perceive is real. I mean, we can try and make testable predictions about what we would see. Okay, if this is real, then I'm going to try something. And if it is, then I should see it one way. If not, I should see another. Well, how are you confident about that? Well, because you can keep doing it over and over and over again. And no, you can never get to absolute 100% philosophical certainty. And that's not the point. That's what he's asking for. When the presuppositionalists and the people making the epistemological argument for God, when they talk about knowledge, they are talking about complete 100% philosophical certainty. And as I'll explain, that's just not possible. That's not something that's really valid. And of course, I got my earlier videos on Bayes' rule showing how that doesn't really make any mathematical sense, but we'll get into the fundamental contradiction that he and all of the other presuppositionalists make. So, skip some more first, though. A lot of this is just him just asking the same question over and over in different ways. So knowledge, to be completely justified internally and warranted externally, would require me to be myself, the other, and the one observing us. I would need to be a triune being, 3 persons in one. This is required to establish just one single fact that can function as a starting premise in an argument. I would also need to know how this fact relates to other facts in the argument that contains it, and how the argument relates to all other arguments to ensure its implications are truly understood, so I would finally need to know all facts. Even if I have accomplished all of this, the final barrier is how to be sure the facts I am thinking about actually correspond to the way my mind thinks about them. That doesn't make any sense. To know this, I would really need to be the creator of all the facts themselves. In other words, the only person who can really know that, the only being who can really know that is God. Because he's the only one who's all-knowing. But, since you're a Christian, God can kind of loan you some of his all-knowingness. If we are going to know anything, we must have revelation from an epistemological authority, never mind the contradiction of the phrase epistemological authority, capable of grounding our knowledge for us. This authority must not be subject to the same epistemological futility we are. And as I'm going to show, that's a logical contradiction. He must be triune, so he can establish both the internal justification and external warrant of any fact by grounding the subject to object, subject to subject, and subject to self relationships. He must be omniscient so that he knows all factual premises and the relationship between them and between all logical arguments. He must be creator and sustainer of all facts and the relationship of our minds to those facts, so he knows the facts actually correspond to the way his mind and ours thinks about them and knows they have not just popped into existence a moment ago. Only the triune creator God is the final authority for knowledge, and only he can be the beginning of knowledge for us. For knowledge to be established for finite human reasoners like ourselves, we must have revelation from God, and he accused us of being vain. At this point, a common reply is if the above reasoning is sound, it does not prove we have revelation from God, but only that we cannot know anything. This reply is mistaken. It says we can prove that we cannot prove anything, that we can know that we cannot know anything. Both of these statements are contradictions and so cannot be true. Do you see the equivocation? Did you spot it? He's using the word know in two different ways. There's know as in a logical conclusion, like, we know 2 + 2 = 4, or given premise 1 and premise 2, then we can know the conclusion, things like that. The validity of logic. And then there's knowledge about reality, or about some fact about reality. The sun is currently shining. Can we know that? Can we really know that? He's also using know in the full, again, philosophical 100% certainty, which, of course, is not how... So he's playing around with definitions here. And he's also doing something else. He says only that we cannot know anything. Know in the sense of 100% philosophical certainty. But that's not anything like proof. Because they would come back with stuff like, well, how do you know that? How do you know that you know that? Well, I don't know that I know that. Maybe there are some things that I know with 100% certainty. But I don't know that I know that. I can't get that knowledge. Well, how do you know you can't get that knowledge? I don't know that I can't get that knowledge. There might be some way that I don't know about. They're trying to limit I don't know in this very narrow, basically using it like disproof. But I don't know somehow means I can prove that we don't know or something like that. I don't know is very open-ended. But he doesn't want it to be that way, so... Give me an edit here. Okay, I'm back. And I know we're most of the way through it. We did a lot of skipping, and I'll let you read how he kind of fleshes these out, but the fleshing out doesn't really solve any of the problems that I'm giving. And also, if you read through this, you'll see there's a lot of just talking about himself and a lot of just padding this out with lots of just prose that just, it's not very well written. All right, but he says, the undeniable precondition for finite reasoners like us is to be able to affirm or deny anything at all, including the conclusion of this argument, is that we have revelation from God. If the above argument is sound, it's not. It shows that any knowledge on our part presupposes the existence of the triune God who has revealed to us what we need to have this knowledge. But again, how do you know he did that? He tried to write that off. I'll get to it. Let's let him give himself enough rope. Let's let him dig the hole big enough. Without this revelation, our knowledge claims would be unintelligible. But we cannot affirm our knowledge claims are unintelligible because doing so presupposes they are not. If we affirm or deny anything at all, we are affirming the triune God exists. In other words, even if you deny something, if you say that can't be true, that still means you're saying God exists and has revealed this knowledge to us. Even to question or deny his existence assumes his existence, because without revelation from God, we cannot know any facts by which to make such a claim. Both agnosticism and atheism presuppose revelation from God to make their claims and are therefore impossible positions to hold without contradiction. All facts are God's facts. And then he just basically keeps saying that. Yeah, brevity is not this guy's strong suit. All right, let's talk about the contradiction here. He is saying that the only way we can truly know anything, true philosophical knowledge, is if there's a supreme being that has that knowledge. And that he gives us some of that knowledge through revelation. And that revelation is the Bible. Now, the first problem, how do you know this isn't the Matrix? How do you know you're not a brain in a jar? But I can know because I have the Bible. Well, how do you know the Bible exists? If you can't trust your senses, are you seeing the Bible with your senses? Is that how you're reading it? Is that how you're feeling it when you touch the Bible? You open the pages and you feel, oh, I've got a book here. Well, that's your senses, isn't it? How do you know the Bible isn't just a product of the simulation? You see how it falls apart? But the big one is that there has to be a being somehow with all knowledge, with full knowledge and full awareness that he has all knowledge. Such a being is a logical contradiction. Let's think about it. Let's grant him everything. Let's say that reality exists exactly the way Christians say it does. There's a God who's a supreme being. He's omnipresent, all-powerful. He's got all the omnis. And he does all the things. He creates heaven and earth and the Adam and Eve and Garden of Eden and all of that. All of that. Let's grant it everything. The universe is set up exactly like they say it is. With God completely being all-powerful and all-knowledgeable in all of it. Now, let's consider an alternate reality where the supreme being is Yog-Sothoth, the outer god. And Yog-Sothoth has decided to create a simulated reality. And in this simulated reality, he just creates one thing. He creates God to be all knowledgeable, all powerful, all that other stuff inside of this reality. But outside of that reality, God can't get any information. Because all that is Yog-Sothoth. Because Yog-Sothoth knows the gate. He is the gate. He is the key and guardian of the gate. Past, present, and future are all one in Yog-Sothoth. So Yog-Sothoth can make this simulation perfectly. And not only would there be no way for God to know that he was in a simulated reality, even if he thought of the possibility, there'd be no way for him to interrogate that fact. Every test he could possibly do would appear to confirm his all-knowingness, even though he himself wouldn't be able to tell that he was in a simulation. He might have the full belief that he was, with the appearance that he was, the confidence that he was, and might be able to know everything within this simulation, but he couldn't know anything outside of it. Now, we've got two realities here. From God's point of view, and for that matter from ours, there's no difference. How could God be able to distinguish which reality he was living in? How would he be able to tell if he were the actual supreme being versus the possibility of him being in Yog-Sothoth's simulation? Do you see, the Matrix problem applies to God too. And since God cannot know, if he is in the simulation because he can't get any knowledge outside of it, because Yog-Sothoth has blocked him off from that because he is the gate, and he knows the gate, and he is key and guardian of the gate, so God cannot get outside of that, then he cannot know which reality he exists in. And so, God cannot fully be knowledgeable of his own all-knowingness, which is a contradiction. God would not be able to tell if he truly were all-knowing, or if there were anything he didn't know, because if there were anything he didn't know, he wouldn't know that. God would not be able to prove to actually have full 100% philosophical certainty that he's all-knowing. And for that matter, neither would Yog-Sothoth. Because there might be a simulation above him, who knows? There's no way to tell. There's no way to rule it out with complete 100% philosophical certainty. The whole idea is wrong because a fully all-knowing being, it's not that such an all-knowing being can't exist, because remember, in the first reality, he does. There's just no way he can tell whether he's in the first reality or the second. So he can appear to be all-knowing. He can, every action can appear to confirm his all-knowingness. And he can have the firm, steadfast belief that he is all-knowing. And he might actually be all-knowing. But he couldn't know that with absolute 100% philosophical certainty. And that's how this all falls apart. So, thank you all for watching. Comments for the common God, shares for the share-through. And I say that, it's becoming kind of a gimmick. I might stop saying it. I don't know. It's fun. I really want to keep saying it. But I don't want to downplay sharing. Because what I've come to notice is, there was a video a few weeks ago. And as I've said, you can see when the shadow banning kicks in, because ordinarily the views make this nice curve, and they go up and they curve, and they end up, asymptotically flattening off. Well, you can tell if it goes up a little bit, then it goes, and then it just flattens off really quickly. You can tell when the shadow banning kicks in. Anywhere, it seems, between like 2 and 11 hours after the video gets going, but like some of the real popular ones, it's gonna go, and it's gonna get thousands of views, and then cuts off. Yeah. Follow that curve, and you'll get a lot more views than you actually get. Well, I noticed that one of them got a bump. And that little kind of bump in views where it kind of leveled off, then it got bump, and then it kind of leveled off again. That bump coincided with someone sharing it on Twitter, which I appreciate greatly, but I don't think that share got all that many views. Not enough to account for the bump that I got. So, what must have happened was, there was a share, it noticed that someone had shared it, it noticed that people were watching the video through that embed or following the link or whatever, and the algorithm gave it a little boost from that. And I did that myself with the Bahnsen video. It had kind of been cut off by the shadow banning. I posted it on Twitter. I don't have that many Twitter followers. There weren't all these people, rushing to watch the video. Some of them did. And that was enough to create a bump that was much higher than the number of people who would have seen the videos through actually my Twitter feed. So, something about that, something about being shared and being links coming in from the outside and people viewing through embeds and things like that, something about that gives a little bump to the algorithm. That's what sharing does for creators. And even if you don't think you have that much of a following, even if you think only a few people are going to see it, when my video gets hundreds of views, if just a fraction of those people actually shared it, we could actually maybe possibly get above the shadow banning. It would at least help. So yeah, sharing helps a lot. Sharing it anywhere you can, just trying to get views from where you can, because that'll bump it up in the algorithm. Also, of course, please hit like, subscribe, and the bell, and go to donate.bogosity.tv to keep me doing this. Even become a regular supporter. Get these videos early and ad-free. Thank you so very much for watching. Until next time, stay strong and be free.